Good morning. So, we're continuing our journey of learning to know Jesus in a new way during this Easter season. So, let's continue. White is the color of Easter. In the first week, we learned about how Jesus was known in absence in the empty tomb. And last week, we heard about how Jesus was made known in the breaking of the bread. Now, one dark night in Jerusalem, the disciples gathered in an upper room with the door locked. And they were afraid that the soldiers would come and take them, like they had come and taken Jesus. And someone said, "Peace be with you." And it looked like that someone was Jesus. At first they thought it was a ghost, but then he talked with them. And they saw his wounds, and he ate a piece of fish, and he opened the scriptures to them as he had on the road to Emmaus. And finally he said, "Peace be with you." And he was gone. Now Thomas had not been with them that night, and when they told him what had happened, he did not believe them. He had doubt in his bones. "I won't believe until I can touch his hands." And why wouldn't he doubt? Their minds were stretching big enough to know Jesus in a new way. And 8 days passed. And the disciples gathered again in that upper room with the door shut. But this time, Thomas was there. And this time, he went right up to Thomas and held out his hand. "Touch me." All Thomas could do was fall to his knees. "My Lord and my God." Jesus looked at him for a long time. "Do you believe because you have seen?" And he looked around the whole circle slowly and said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." I wonder if there's some other things that you'd like to bring to tell this story, to add to this story. While you think about that, I have a book I'm going to share with you. It's called Chicken Sunday. It is most certainly an Easter book. It is written by Patricia Polacco. Stuart and Winston were my neighbors. They were my brothers by a solemn ceremony we had performed in their backyard. They weren't the same religion as that I was. They were Baptists. Their grandma, Eula May Walker, was my grandma now. My babushka had died 2 summers before. Sometimes my mother let me go to church on a Sunday with them. How I loved to hear Miss Eula sing. She had a voice like slow thunder and sweet rain. We'd walk to church and back, and she'd take my hand as we crossed College Avenue. Even though we've been a churching up like decent folks ought to, she'd say, I don't want you to step out in front of one of those too fast cars. You'll be as flat as a hen's tongue. She squeezed my hand. Now, when we passed Mr. Kadinsky's hat shop, Miss Eula would always stop and look in the window at the wonderful hats. And then she'd sigh and walk on. We called those Sundays Chicken Sundays because Miss Eula almost always fried chicken for dinner. And there'd be collard greens with bacon and a big pot of hoppin' john and corn on the cob and fried spoon bread. On Sunday at the table, we watched her paper fan flutter back and forth, pulling moist chicken fried air along with it. She took a deep breath, and her skin glowed as she smiled. And then she told us something we already knew. That Easter bonnet in Mr. Kadinsky's window is the most beautiful thing I ever did see, she said thoughtfully. And the 3 of us exchanged looks. We wanted to get her that hat more than anything in the world. Now, Stuart reached into the hole in the trunk of our wish tree in the backyard. He pulled out a rusty Band-Aid box. And the 3 of us held our breath as we counted the money inside that we had been saving for weeks. If we are going to get that hat for Miss Eula in time for Easter, we are going to need a lot more than this, I announced. Maybe we should ask Mr. Kadinsky if we could sweep up his shop or something to earn the rest of the money, Stuart said. I don't know, Winnie said fearfully. He's such a strange old man. He never smiles at anyone. He always looks so mean. We all agreed it was worth a try anyway. The next day, we took a shortcut down the alley and back of the hat shop, and bigger boys were already there, and they were yelling, and eggs flew past us and pelted Mr. Kadinsky's back door. And just as the boys ran away, the door flew open, and Mr. Kadinsky glared straight at us. You there, he yelled. Why do you kids do things like this? It wasn't us, Stuart tried to say. But Mr. Kadinsky wouldn't listen to us. All I want to do is live my life in peace. I'm calling your grandmother, he shouted as he wagged his finger in Stuart's face. Miss Eula was in her living room, waiting for us. Miss Eula, I didn't throw those eggs, I sobbed. Some big boys did, Stuart sputtered. What were you doing at the back of his shop in the first place, she asked. We knew that we couldn't tell her the truth, so we just stood there and cried. And she looked at us for a long while. Baby dears, I want to believe you. Heaven knows I brought you children up to tell the truth. If you say you didn't do it, then I believe you. It is too bad, though, she went on to say. That poor man has suffered so much in his life, he deserves more than eggs thrown at him. You know, he thinks you threw the eggs. You'll have to show him that you are good people. You'll have to change his mind somehow. In my kitchen the next day, we thought and thought. How can we win him over when he thinks that we threw those eggs? Stuart asked. He doesn't even like us, Winston chirped. Eggs, I said quietly. Eggs, Stuart asked. Eggs, I screamed, and I went into the kitchen drawer and took out a lump of beeswax, a candle, a small funnel with a wooden handle, and some packets of yellow, red, and black dye. And my mom helped me show the boys how to decorate eggs the way my bubby had taught us, the way they do it in the old country. And we made designs on eggshells with hot wax, and then dyed them, and finally melted the wax patterns off. We put the eggs in a basket, and even though we were afraid, we marched into Mr. Kadinsky's shop and put them on the counter. He raised his eyebrows and glowered at us. Then his eyes dropped to the basket. Spasiba, he said softly. That means thank you in Russian. Pashanki eggs, he said as he looked closely. I haven't seen these since I left my homeland. We didn't throw those eggs at your door, Mr. Kadinsky, we told him. He looked at us for a minute. Well, then you have great courage to be here. You have chutzpah. And then his eyes glistened and his mouth curled into a warm smile. Come, have some tea with me. And we spent the whole afternoon talking together, having poppy seed cake and strong tea, and he told us about his life, and we told him about ours. And when we finally got the courage to ask about doing odd jobs for some extra money, he apologized and told us that there was no work. We didn't tell him what we wanted the money for. It didn't seem the right thing to do, and our hearts sank. I tell you this, he said thoughtfully, those eggs are as beautiful as my hats. Stuart, Winnie, and I looked at each other. It's almost Easter, he went on to say. I'm sure there's people who would love those eggs. Set up a table and sell them right here in my shop. For the next days, we worked very hard and we made almost a dozen Pashanki eggs. And when people came in, they picked them up and said things like, beautiful, splendid, intricate, glorious. We sold them all in a single day. That afternoon, when all the eggs were gone, we counted our money, and we had more than enough for the hat. And just as we were to tell Mr. Kadinsky that we wanted to buy the hat, he came out from the back room holding a beautiful hat box, gift wrapped. Keep your money, children, he said softly. I have seen Miss Eula admire this. It's for her, isn't it? Tell her that I know you are very good children. Such good children. And when Easter Sunday arrived, we thought our hearts would burst when we watched Miss Eula open the hat box, and she held us close as big tears rolled down her cheeks. Our hearts sang with the choir that Sunday. She looked beautiful in that hat. And when it came to be time for her solo, we knew that she was singing just for us. And her voice was like slow thunder and sweet rain. And later that day, Miss Eula sat at the head of the table and she said, oh, baby dears, I can die happy now. And after I'm dead, on Chicken Sundays, I want you to boil up some chicken bones, gravy and all, and pour it over my grave. So late at night when I'm hungry, I can reach out and have some. And then she rolled her head back and laughed from a deep, holy place inside. And Winston, Stuart, and I are grown up now. Our old neighborhood has changed some, and yet it's still familiar too. The freeway rumbles over the spot where Mr. Kadinsky's shop once stood, and I think of him often in his glorious hats. But every year we take some chicken soup up to Mountain View Cemetery and do just as she asked. And sometimes when we're especially quiet inside, we can hear her sing. A voice that sounds like slow thunder in the sweet rain. Now let's close with a prayer. Worship with me, O Lord. Come, open my heart, and let me sing harmony to your tune. Let your voice vibrate a new strain, and your words awaken a lost language. Worship with me, O Lord. Stir me from my slumbers, and when I awake, I'm still with you. Worship with me, O Lord. Amen. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you soon. Bye.